The world of investing is hot right now. It seems like everywhere you look, there are new investment opportunities. With the stock market hitting all-time highs and cryptocurrencies skyrocketing, it's easy to feel like you're missing out on all that sweet cheddar that others are raking in. But when the market is hot, the sharks come out to take advantage of easy prey that don't have the experience to recognize a trap. To savvy criminals, fake investment schemes are an easy way to siphon money off of unwitting investors. And as long as the market continues to do well, it's challenging to determine the fake ones from the real ones. There are many types of fake investment schemes, but Ponzi schemes are the most common because they are often short-lived, existing only long enough for the perpetrators to siphon enough money off the top before they disappear. Obviously, this wasn't the case with some of the most well-known Ponzi schemes, such as the one run by Bernie Madoff, but those sorts of schemes are not the norm. Most Ponzi schemes, of which there are many, only exist during bull market cycles, when the operation is easy to conceal. So what exactly is a Ponzi scheme? Put simply, a Ponzi scheme is a type of scam where the perpetrators pretend to operate a real investment portfolio. They trick investors into giving them money, and then instead of actually investing it, they use the money to give those investors a return. In a real investment portfolio, the money that is returned to investors is a product of the sale of an underlying asset. Ponzi schemes simply generate fake returns. Along the way, the criminals running the operation skim money off the top. The operation continues to run as long as they continue to get new investors whose money is used to pay the fake returns for the early investors. Let's look at a practical example. First off, we have our criminal mastermind. Let's call him Greg. Greg knows a few wealthy people. Maybe he's got some connections in the investment industry. Greg convinces a few of his contacts to invest in a new fund. He's promised each of these people that he can deliver a consistent 10% return on their investment. Eager to have such a great return, each of these connections gives Greg $100,000. In a normal investment fund, Greg would use that money to purchase securities that he believes are going to increase in value. But in this scheme, Greg is simply going to stash that money away in a bank. Eventually, it comes time to deliver the returns to his investors, returns that would normally come from selling the underlying securities. But in Greg's case, he simply takes $30,000 out of his bank account and delivers $10,000 to each of his investors. Greg now has $270,000 in his account. However, this is where it gets interesting. Ecstatic that they've seen such a consistent return as promised, these investors usually choose to reinvest their earnings back into the fund. This means that $10,000 they just received goes right back into Greg's pocket. But it gets even better than that. Getting a consistent return on the stock market is a really challenging thing to do, even for savvy investors. After they've seen real potential in this fund, those early investors start to tell their friends, who in turn give Greg their money to invest. Let's say each of those people refer two of their friends to the fund, and those investors pay Greg an additional $100,000 each. Now Greg has $900,000 in the bank. On the balance sheet, Greg is actually $30,000 in the red, but Greg's not planning on staying in the game long enough to actually settle up with his investors. Greg continues this strategy as long as he can. New investors come into the fund, and their money is used to pay out the early investors. Some investors will choose to exit the fund, and Greg will happily deliver them their initial investment plus their earnings in order to not get caught. He offers enough incentives and onboards enough new investors that he can safely do this without going negative. Most investors are happy to just keep their money in the fund. All of a sudden, the unthinkable happens. A market crash. The Dow Jones has a 20% correction. Easily spooked, many investors look to cash out of the fund all at once. Greg is stuck. He can't afford to pay all of them out because his balance sheets are completely fake at this point. So he does what any smart criminal would do. He withdraws the money out of his accounts and disappears, making a significant profit and leaving his investors in the lurch. Greg retires to a beach in the Caribbean and is never heard from again. Greg's a pretty crappy guy, huh? You can probably tell why this scheme works. Most investors don't actually want to know how their money is being spent. All they want is the best deal they can find, the one that pays them the most for their money. Ponzi schemes rely on investors that don't understand the game. They prey upon people who are more comfortable placing their trust in an expert than actually knowing what assets they own. But now that we know the basic premise of how these schemes work, there are still a lot of unanswered questions, such as, how do they actually do it? Well, to answer that question, we need to learn a little bit more about Greg. Running a scam is almost as tough as running a real business, and you have to have a lot of the same components. First, you have to understand the industry. Greg comes from a well-off background. He's been working in the investment industry for at least a few years, enough time to get some important people to trust him, to have learned the ins and outs of the laws and regulations, and to have worked at some great firms that can make his resume look impressive. So when Greg goes off to start his own investment firm, nobody bats an eye. It's the next logical step for any enterprising investment manager. Start your own fund. Many of the most famous Ponzi schemes in history have been started by people with industry experience. Bernie Madoff was at one time the chairman of the NASDAQ. Alan Stanford, another well-known Ponzi schemer, successfully played the real estate game in the early 1980s. Prestige in the industry goes a long way in convincing early investors to invest in the fund. Second, you should target a community. Another strategy that Greg uses is that he's been a long-time member of the Catholic Church. Greg can use his ties to this community to drum up even more investors for his fund. Belonging to a community, and especially a wealthy one, can be an easy way to increase the number of investors. Bernie Madoff did this by targeting Jewish people. Sarah Howe also employed this strategy by targeting unmarried women in the 1880s. Third, you have to be creative. Greg has always been a mover and a shaker. He's been an entrepreneur for as long as he can remember, and was always coming up with creative ways to win. This is going to help him in his scheme, because he has to come up with a creative, yet believable, investment strategy to sell his investors on. Typically, these schemes don't just invest the money into the stock market. That would be too simple, and people would question the reliability of the consistent returns. No, instead, Greg has to come up with a foolproof method for beating the market. For Charles Ponzi, his scheme was buying discounted postal coupons in foreign countries and redeeming them in the US, an early form of arbitrage. Tom Petters, who operated a $3.65 billion Ponzi scheme, told investors that he was purchasing electronic merchandise and reselling it to large retailers. Fourth, you have to operate your scheme like a business. Greg wants investors to believe his scheme is legitimate, so he realizes he has to do everything that normal businesses would do. That includes employing customer service representatives to field investor inquiries, falsifying loads of documents that are delivered to investors, such as 1099 DIVs and other tax forms, operating the business out of a real location, usually in high-traffic business districts, meeting with potential investors and giving them sales pitches, promptly servicing investor withdrawal requests, and most importantly of all, bookkeeping. Even though the books are completely fake, the scheme will completely fall apart if the schemer is not accurately keeping books. As you can see, running a Ponzi scheme is almost as much work as running the business itself. So if you've made it this far, you might be wondering about the title of this video. Why is 2021 the year of the Ponzi scheme? Well, to start, we're in the middle of an incredible bull market. This market started increasing steadily after the 2020 crash and has continued ever since. Many people are looking for ways to offset some of the losses they took in 2020 and are reaching out to riskier investment vehicles. Still others saw the GameStop mania that occurred in early 2021 and feel like they missed out. Experts agree that fraud feeds on uncertainty, financial distress, upheaval, and times of change. All of those identifiers apply to the times in which we are living, where the world is rapidly changing due to how society reacted to COVID-19 and the rapid increase in technology available at our fingertips. Whenever there are new technologies that consumers don't understand yet, fraud is lurking just around the corner. Bitcoin Ponzi schemes have promised investors up to 7% interest per week. Many Ponzi schemes will use fancy buzzwords like AI and machine learning to trick investors into thinking they found the golden ticket to reliable 20% returns. Another reason experts think that 2021 is going to be a massive year for Ponzi schemes is because they're already seeing schemes falling apart, even while the market is doing incredibly well. This is uncharacteristic of Ponzi schemes. Normally, they only start to fall apart once the market pulls back. Because they are failing regardless of how the market is doing, it's an indicator that the market is fairly saturated with them. So naturally, as we continue into 2021, proceed with a bit of caution when looking into new investment funds. Make sure to do your research and avoid any fund that promises a consistent return. The market is not consistent, and you always have to ask yourself, if they can consistently generate 20% returns, what do they need my money for? Hey guys, thanks for tuning in this week. If you liked it, please smash the subscribe button and the like button.